Welcome to another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
If you are joining us today, you are a learner. You're the kind of a person who doesn't just want the surface level story, right? You want to know how the story was built, who built it, and what they might be intentionally hiding from you.
Exactly. The hidden architecture of the narrative.
Right. And we are thrilled you're here for this one.
Yeah.
Today, we're asking a pretty massive fundamental question. What if the fantasy world you thought you knew intimately was actually, well, only half the picture?
Or even less than half.
Yeah. What if the supposed history of that world is just as messy, just as contradictory, and just as deeply manipulated as our own real-world history?
It is a phenomenal premise to explore. I mean, we so often consume fantasy literature as absolute fact, you know?
Really do.
The author writes that a castle is 10,000 years old or that a specific king reigned for a millennium, and we simply accept it.
Right, because it's a fantasy book.
Yeah.
The author said it, so it's canon.
Precisely. We operate under the assumption that the narrator is omniscient and perfectly objective. But when you apply real-world historical scrutiny techniques like source evaluation, archaeological corroboration, and just basic media literacy to a world populated by dragons and ice zombies, the entire foundation shifts.
It really
You
does.
start to see the cracks in the mythology.
Which is the exact methodology we are applying today. Our focus for this deep dive relies on a truly remarkable source text. It is a massive, incredibly detailed book called The World of Ice and Fire: The Untold History of Westeros and the Game of Thrones.
Written by George R.R. Martin, Elio M. García Jr., and Linda Antonsson.
Yes, thank you. Now, we aren't approaching this as just some behind-the-scenes making of companion book. We are embarking on a very specific mission today.
A historiographical mission.
Exactly. We're going to peel back the layers of ancient myth, cut through the soaring songs of the bards, and deconstruct the political propaganda to try and unearth the actual historical truth hidden within this monumental text.
And to accomplish that, we first have to understand the unique framing of the source material itself. Because The World of Ice and Fire is written entirely as an in-universe historical document.
Right. It's not the authors talking to us directly.
No, not at all. It is not George R.R. Martin speaking to the reader from an omniscient perch. The text is presented as a manuscript compiled by a fictional scholar, a character named Maester Yandel of the Citadel.
Which changes everything.
Immediately, the dynamic changes. We aren't just reading history, we are reading historiography. We're reading one specific academic's attempt to synthesize thousands of years of conflicting accounts, faded scrolls, and, quite frankly, dubious legends.
I want to spend a moment on who Maester Yandel actually is, because his background completely colors the lens through which we are reading this history. He wasn't some highborn lord who decided to dabble in historical archiving to pass the time, right?
No, not at all.
Yandel's origin story is startlingly humble. He was a foundling. He was literally abandoned at birth, specifically in the 10th year of the reign of the last Targaryen king, Aerys II.
A very turbulent time.
Very. And he was left in an empty stall in the scribe's hearth, which is the public area of the Citadel, where acolytes write letters for small folk who can't read or write.
That humble beginning is so crucial for understanding his perspective. He is, quite literally, a child of the Citadel. His entire worldview is shaped by the halls, the chambers, the massive libraries of this academic institution.
He doesn't have outside loyalties.
Right, he doesn't have a noble house's agenda to push from birth.
Yeah.
He's an institutional man through and through.
And his entry into the academic hierarchy is almost comical. It's so mundane. An acolyte finds this squalling baby and takes him to the seneschal of that year, Archmaester Edgerin.
Oh, Edgerin.
Yeah, Edgerin is described as this incredibly intimidating figure. He wears a ring, a rod, and a mask all made of silver. He looks down at this crying infant and announces that the baby might, quote, prove of use.
Which sounds incredibly ominous in a fantasy setting.
Right. When Yandel was a young boy, he naturally assumed Archmaester Edgerin meant he had some great prophetic destiny, the chosen one trope. But as he grew older, Yandel realized that Edgerin was simply in the middle of writing a treatise on the swaddling of infants.
He just needed a test subject.
He desperately needed a test subject for his theories. It grounds this epic high fantasy setting in the totally mundane reality of academic research.
It really does. Yandel isn't the chosen one of prophecy. He's a localized data point for a medieval pediatrics treatise.
Exactly.
But because he is kept around for this study, he is raised by servants within the Citadel. Eventually, another Archmaester, Walgrave, takes an interest in him and gives him the gift of letters, teaching the boy to read.
And from that moment, Yandel is just captivated. He wants nothing more than to read about far-off places, long-dead men, and the stars. He eventually forges his own maester's chain, taking his solemn oaths in the 9th year of King Robert Baratheon's reign.
A very different political climate.
Yeah, and in his own prologue, Yandel describes himself as a mason. He explicitly states he isn't claiming to know the absolute truth of everything. He sees his role as simply taking his turn to carve what he knows, to place one more stone in the great bastion of knowledge that the Citadel has been constructing for centuries.
That mason metaphor is a profound statement on how institutional knowledge is constructed.
How so?
Well, every historical record is built stone by stone. What one scholar fails to uncover, the next generation might discover. Yandel acknowledges he's standing on the shoulders of long-dead maesters, reading their rotting scrolls to compile his work. He also notes his intended audience. He hopes to create a work that humble but lettered men might read to their families to grow wiser.
It's a very noble intention.
It is. But that noble intention collides violently with the political reality of his era.
Which brings us to the dedication of the manuscript. This is where the shifting sands of the present completely upend Yandel's lifelong project.
And this is perhaps the most vital lesson for you, the listener, as we dive into these ancient histories today. History is never written in a vacuum.
Never.
The recording of the past is always held hostage by the politics of the present moment.
Yandel begins writing this comprehensive history during what he genuinely believes is the golden reign of King Robert Baratheon. It's a rare era of peace. His initial intention is to dedicate this massive volume to King Robert and his heirs as a grand celebration of the unified world they have inherited.
But history doesn't politely pause just because a scholar is trying to write it down.
No, it certainly doesn't. In the afterword of the text, we see Yandel actively lamenting that his work has been completely overtaken by current events. The noble hand of the king, Jon Arryn, is suddenly murdered. King Robert himself dies under very suspicious circumstances.
Chaos erupts.
Absolute chaos, a madness of pride and violence that leashes across the realm as multiple pretenders declare themselves kings and tear the continent apart. And, to complicate matters further, there are terrifying, deeply disturbing rumors trickling into the Citadel from the Far East.
Rumors about dragons.
Yes, creatures thought extinct for over a century, supposedly being reborn. Imagine spending your entire adult life writing the definitive, authorized history of your world, only for the central authority of that world to completely shatter right as you're drafting the final chapters.
It's a historian's worst nightmare.
The manuscript itself becomes a living document, actively altered by the sudden outbreak of a continent-wide civil war. It forces you to wonder what Yandel hastily chose to cross out.
Oh, absolutely.
Or how he subtly reframed certain historical families, like the Lannisters or the Targaryens, depending on whose army was closest to the gates of Old Town at the exact moment he was writing that specific page.
That inherent bias and that fear of political reprisal is the lens through which we must view every subsequent chapter. We are acting as historical detectives here. We have to read Yandel's compiled history while simultaneously reading between the lines of his omissions.
So keeping that academic skepticism in mind, let's travel all the way back to the beginning, the deep past, the Dawn Age.
The foundation of it all.
Right. The first question any historian attempts to answer is, well, when did civilization actually begin? And the answer provided in the source material is a testament to the limits of ancient history. Yandel essentially throws his hands up. Is the world 40,000 years old? Is it 500,000 years old?
It highlights a fundamental problem of historiography, the absolute unreliability of the pre-literate era.
Because they weren't writing anything down.
Exactly. Before the arrival of the Andals in Westeros, and before the rise of the Valyrians and the Giscari in the east, no one utilized a formalized written language. The Dawn Age was a barbarous time of scattered tribes living directly from the land, possessing no knowledge of working metal or even taming beasts of burden.
It was pure survival.
And when a society has no written records, timelines become completely fluid. 1,000 years of mundane existence can be compressed into a single generation in the telling of a campfire story. Or a single harsh winter can be stretched in the cultural memory into an epic-defining event.
Which perfectly explains the immense confusion surrounding the first inhabitants of Westeros, the Elder races.
Right.
When modern citizens of this world hear nursery tales, they hear about the children of the forest wielding incredible magic, and they hear about the giants. And the automatic assumption is to treat these entities purely as fairy tales.
Because that's how they're presented in the songs.
Exactly. But the source text compels us to look at the anthropological reality beneath the myth.
Take the giants, for instance. The common nursery tales, the ones sung by bards to entertain children, picture giants simply as massively scaled-up humans. Men who are 50 feet tall.
Just big guys with normal human proportions.
Right. But Yandel bypasses the bards and consults the factual logs from the rangers of the Night's Watch. These are the sworn brothers on the wall who are the only men to actually encounter and document giants while they still lived in the far north.
And their accounts paint a very different picture.
A completely different biological picture. Giants weren't just big men. They were a distinctly different hominid-like species covered in a thick pelt of fur. They were powerful, but cognitively simple, utilizing crude tools and riding mammoths rather than possessing high human intelligence.
The text applies that same demystification to the green men of the Isle of Faces.
Another great example.
The popular nursery tales describe the green men as having literal dark green skin and actual animal horns growing directly out of their skulls, like literal demons or magical creatures.
Which is a textbook corruption of the likely truth through centuries of oral storytelling.
How so?
Well, Yandel points out that occasionally some foolhardy young river lord will take a boat out to the sacred Isle of Faces before a flock of ravens drives him away. The reality observed by these trespassers is that the green men simply wore green garments to blend in with the forest.
Camouflage.
Exactly. And they donned horned headdresses for religious or ceremonial purposes.
So no horns growing out of their skulls.
No, just hats.
For the listener trying to build better media literacy, this is a profound case study. We are watching how quickly and dramatically historical facts distort into monstrous fairy tales when a culture relies purely on the spoken word.
It happens so fast.
If you pass a story down through 100 generations without locking it into writing, a shaman wearing a ceremonial horned hat becomes a literal horned demon. A large, furry hominid becomes an impossibly tall, civilized giant. It trains you to always question the mundane reality that birthed the magical myth.
And that specific analytical skill is absolutely required when we move into the next major historical era, the Age of Heroes.
Ah, yes. The big names.
This is the period following the Dawn Age, supposedly lasting for thousands of years, where the first men and the children of the forest lived in peace after signing a great pact. This era gives us the foundational titans of Westerosi lore.
Brandon the Builder, who supposedly raised the wall.
Lom the Clever, who swindled Casterly Rock.
Garth Greenhand, who made the land fertile. Duran Godsgrief, who built Storm's End to defy the sea gods. As a casual consumer of the primary narrative, you hear those names and assume they are the established historical bedrock of the noble houses.
Of course you do.
But Yandel's text is surprisingly hostile toward their literal existence.
He applies rigorous academic skepticism. Yandel notes that while these ancient figures left behind some massive ruined ring forts and stone monuments inscribed with crude runes, giving us a tiny sliver of archaeological corroboration, the sweeping, detailed tales we have of their lives were written down thousands of years after the fact.
Thousands.
Thousands of years later by septons and maesters who were merely transcribing oral myths. Yandel calls them names to conjure with, suggesting that while a man named Brandon likely existed and built a fortress, the legendary figure who supposedly lived for centuries and built every major castle on the continent holds far less truth than fancy.
The primary culprits for this historical vandalism are the singers. The book reserves an incredible amount of academic disdain for bards.
And it is an entirely justified disdain from a historian's perspective. The singers are the pop culture media apparatus of this world. Their primary goal is not historical accuracy or archival preservation.
What is it?
Their goal is entertainment, emotional resonance, and most importantly, securing patronage.
Getting paid.
Exactly.
The most glaring, almost funny example of this in the text is the legend of Serwyn of the Mirror Shield. The singers perform these incredibly dramatic, sweeping, epic ballads about Serwyn, explicitly numbering him as one of the legendary Knights of the Kingsguard who protected the early kings. He is held up as the ultimate symbol of Westerosi chivalry. But the timeline is completely fractured.
The anachronism is massive. The institution of the Kingsguard, and indeed the widespread adoption of formalized knighthood under the Faith of the Seven, did not exist in Westeros until the reign of Aegon the Conqueror and the Andal invasions.
Which was way later.
That is thousands of years after the Age of Heroes, which is when the historical Serwyn supposedly lived and died.
It would be the equivalent of a modern author writing a serious historical fiction piece about Julius Caesar leading a specialized Navy SEAL team across the Rubicon. It makes zero chronological sense.
But it makes perfect economic sense if you understand the motivations of a singer. As Yandel explicitly states, singers willingly change history for the sake of a warm place in some lord's hall.
They play to the crowd.
If the current ruling monarch is deeply devoted to the Kingsguard and strictly follows the religion of the Seven, an ambitious singer is going to take a long-dead, culturally significant first man from thousands of years ago, retroactively slap a suit of knightly armor on him, make him a devout follower of the Seven, and claim he served in the Kingsguard.
It's pure flattery.
It flatters the current establishment by validating their modern institutions through ancient heroes.
Yandel even laments that there is a legion of boys and youths made ignorant of the past history of Westeros by these foolish tales. It perfectly illustrates the danger of consuming entertainment as history. You have to ask, who is telling this story? Who is funding them to tell it? And what political or social capital do they gain by altering the facts?
And that distortion extends far beyond individual heroes. It fundamentally warps how we view the geopolitical evolution of the continent. The modern political discourse constantly references the Seven Kingdoms, or the ancient 100 kingdoms that existed before Aegon's conquest.
The 100 Kingdoms. It sounds so official and structured, implying a long history of defined borders and organized diplomacy.
It sounds official, but it is an extreme romanticization of a highly chaotic reality. Westeros was never neatly divided into 100 independent, clearly defined states with bureaucratic governments.
What was it actually like?
It was a brutal, shifting patchwork of petty domains, warlord territories, and isolated ring forts. Power was generally centralized exclusively around a single, highly defensible, high-seat-like Casterly Rock in the west or Winterfell in the north.
So no sprawling borders.
No. If an ancient warlord like Garth Greenhand claimed the grandiose title King of the Reach, it is highly doubtful his actual administrative authority extended much further than a fortnight's ride from his own front gates. These were local strongmen extracting tribute from their immediate surroundings, not monarchs of modern nation-states.
Meaning the whole concept of these clean, unbroken lineages of benevolent kings ruling vast, stable territories since the dawn of time is just more retroactive propaganda.
Exactly.
The current great houses commission these histories to make their modern territorial claims look ancient and legally unassailable.
Precisely. It is the manifestation of power justifying itself through manufactured historical continuity.
And that continuity was almost permanently severed by the defining trauma of the ancient world.
The Long Night.
The generation-long winter. The text paints a terrifying portrait of this era. The others, the White Walkers, descending from the absolute north, pushing humanity to the brink of extinction. The ancient tales claim they rode the corpses of dead horses and unleashed giant ice spiders upon the realms of men.
The inclusion of giant ice spiders is a particularly haunting detail that persists across multiple regional myths. The Long Night is a fascinating historical pivot point because it's an apocalyptic event that seems to have left a cultural scar on the entire known world, not just Westeros.
Right, it wasn't a localized weather event.
No. From the Westerosi perspective, the history focuses narrowly on the last hero. According to the fragmented northern legends, this last hero sought out the remaining children of the forest in a desperate bid for magical aid.
And it was a brutal journey.
Incredibly brutal. His companions froze or were killed one by one, facing giants, cold servants, and the others. Ultimately, the lore suggests that thanks to the children's intercession, the first men of the Night's Watch banded together and managed to win the battle for the dawn, pushing the darkness back.
And following that miraculous victory, they constructed the wall. This mind-boggling continental structure of solid ice, continuously defended by the sworn brotherhood of the Night's Watch, which still stands as a testament to that ancient war thousands of years later.
What is crucial to remember here, and what the source text does brilliantly, is to contextualize the struggle globally. While Westeros was freezing, devolving into pure survival mode, and building a giant ice wall, the rest of the world was not locked in stasis.
Not at all.
If we shift our focus across the narrow sea to the vast continent of Essos, we see that massive, complex civilizations were taking root and expanding.
The history of Essos is where the scope of this world truly expands. Before Valyria, before the Dragon Lords conquered everything, there was the supreme power of Old Gis.
Old Gis is widely recognized by Citadel scholars as the first true organized empire in the recorded world. And it was built upon an incredibly brutal, unyielding foundation of mass slavery.
A dark foundation.
Very dark. Its legendary founder was a figure known as Grazdan the Great. What made the Giscari Empire so utterly dominant wasn't the use of magic or supernatural beasts. It was rigorous, mechanical, military discipline.
They were tacticians.
Exactly. The text emphasizes that Grazdan founded the lockstep legions. These were highly trained soldiers who fought with tall shields and 3 spears, moving and striking as unified, disciplined bodies rather than chaotic mobs. This logistical and tactical superiority allowed them to relentlessly colonize and subjugate their neighbors, reigning supreme over eastern Essos for centuries.
But their supremacy encounters a catastrophic disruptor, Valyria.
The rise of the dragons.
The humble shepherds of the Valyrian Peninsula discover dragons layering in the 14 Flames, a massive chain of volcanoes. They tame these creatures, utilize blood magic, and rapidly rise to power. And the ensuing clash between the Valyrian Freehold and the Giscari Empire is completely one-sided.
It wasn't even a contest.
The Dragon Lords systematically dismantle the Giscari civilization, burning their cities to ash and effectively ending the era of the lockstep legions. But the expansion of Valyria doesn't just reshape Essos, it crashes violently into the history of Westeros.
And this specific dynamic raises a vital lesson about historical geopolitics, one that you can directly map onto our own real-world history. Historical events on one continent rarely remain isolated in a vacuum.
They ripple out.
Always. When the mighty Dragon Lords of Valyria began aggressively conquering their neighbors in western Essos, it created a massive, desperate refugee crisis. Entire populations were forced to flee the advancing fires.
Is it flee or die?
Flee, die, or be enslaved. Many tribes failed to escape, but one specific people, described in the texts as a tall, fair-haired, and highly religious culture, refused to submit to the Valyrian yoke. They abandoned their ancestral lands in Essos and fled across the sea in long ships. These were the Andals.
The Andals. The very people who eventually conquer the majority of Westeros. They bring the faith of the Seven, they introduce ironworking, and they establish the chivalric knightly culture that defines the modern era of the Seven Kingdoms.
Yes.
It completely reframes their invasion. They didn't just wake up one morning, look at a map, and decide to manifest destiny across the ocean. They were terrified refugees pushed out by an existential threat.
The rise of an aggressive superpower in Essos Valyria caused a forced mass migration that violently and permanently overhauled the culture, religion, and demographic makeup of an entirely different continent, Westeros. It demonstrates that the geopolitical landscape of this world is deeply, inextricably interconnected.
So we see how the Valyrian expansion in Essos acts as a pressure cooker, pushing the Andal wave across the narrow sea. But when this Andal wave crashes against Westeros, it doesn't wash over the entire continent evenly. The sheer size and varied geography of Westeros act as a natural breakwater, forcing different regions to forge distinct identities.
It's a great way to put it.
I want to delve into how these specific regions were actually unified, starting with the North and the Starks of Winterfell.
There is a massive geographic misconception about the North that Yandel makes sure to correct early in his treatise. Casual observers often claim the North is as large as the other 6 kingdoms put together. But historically and cartographically, the domain ruled by House Stark comprises little more than a third of the realm.
Still huge, but not half.
Right. It is vast, certainly, but not half the continent.
And it is a deeply brutal environment. It's a harsh, infertile land, characterized by desolate moors, high rocky plains, and freezing mountains. Snow falls frequently, even in the middle of summer, and when actual winter arrives, it is a deadly force. The people who survive there are irrevocably shaped by that harshness.
You have to be tough to live there.
I always assumed the Starks were just naturally respected as leaders, given their honorable portrayal in modern times. But going through Yandel's accounts, that assumption shatters completely. The Starks didn't just inherit this massive territory peacefully.
Not in the slightest. The unification of the North under the direwolf banner was a centuries-long bloodbath. You have to discard the modern image of the honorable, stoic Ned Stark for a moment. The ancient Starks, originally styling themselves the Kings of Winter, were relentless, expansionist warlords.
They were conquerors.
They fought countless, grueling wars to expand their sphere of influence. They fought the Barrow Kings to their south in a brutal territorial struggle the Romantic singers call the Thousand Years' War. However, Yandel notes that translated runic records suggest it was actually a series of intense conflicts lasting closer to 200 years, which only ended when the last Barrow King finally broke, bent the knee, and married his daughter to the Stark King to secure a peace.
But the Barrow Kings were just one obstacle. The Starks waged war against the Warg King and his non-human allies, the Children of the Forest. And when the Warg King finally fell at Sea Dragon Point, the Starks didn't show mercy.
They were ruthless.
They put his sons and his beasts to the sword and actively took his daughters as prizes. They systematically destroyed rival houses, House Greenwood, House Towers, House Amber, House Frost. It is a staggering record of ruthless conquest.
And their bitterest and most resilient foes, of course, were the Red Kings of the Dreadfort, House Bolton. Their domains were vast, stretching from the Last River down to the White Knife. The Boltons actively flayed Stark princes and wore their skins as cloaks.
Just horrifying stuff.
The history of the North is not a noble history of passive, honorable administration. It is a history of brutal, agonizing consolidation by the Starks through superior force and utter ruthlessness.
The literal seat of that hard-won power is Winterfell. Legend insists that Brandon the Builder raised the castle with the help of giants after the Long Night. But again, Yandel points out that Brandon the Builder is credited with an impossible number of monumental works spread over multiple lifetimes.
Right, he couldn't have built everything.
It's far more historically plausible that Brandon became a legendary catch-all title for several ancient, ambitious Stark kings. But what fascinated me most was the specific location of Winterfell. It wasn't built on that exact spot because of some mystical ley line.
No, it was built there because of simple, vital geography. Winterfell is strategically placed directly over massive natural hot springs.
Which is brilliant.
As Yandel logically points out, one can easily imagine the immense life-saving value of a ready source of boiling water in the freezing depths of a deadly northern winter. The first men settled on that exact spot purely for survival, and the early Starks eventually engineered structures to pipe that naturally heated water directly through the stone walls to hit the castle.
It's his practical, brilliant environmental engineering grounding the fantasy in realistic survival mechanics.
Exactly.
Moving from the freezing snow locks north, let's look out to the west, to an environment shaped entirely by salt and stone. The Iron Islands. The Ironborn possess an entirely alternate reality when it comes to their own historical origins.
They really do. The vast majority of scholars in the Citadel believe, based on migration patterns, that the first men were the first human inhabitants of Westeros, arriving via a land bridge. But the Ironborn priests of the drowned god vehemently reject this.
They won't hear of it.
They claim the first men weren't first at all. Their theology dictates that the Ironborn are a distinct, separate creation of humanity, birthed directly from the sea by their god, completely unique to their desolate islands.
Their entire culture reflects that fierce isolationism and rejection of mainland norms. While the kings of the Greenlands wore crowns of beaten gold or bronze, the ancient Ironborn kings wore driftwood crowns.
Such a powerful image.
That is a remarkably potent symbol. 1,000 years of Andral cultural influence and missionary work couldn't erase the cultural memory of a driftwood crown. It's a crown not mined from the earth, but given by the sea, shaped by the violence of the storm.
You can clearly see how their unforgiving environment dictates their cultural psychology. Look at Pike, the ancient and decaying seat of House Greyjoy. It's a castle built on sheer rock stacks plunging into the churning ocean, eroding piece by piece over centuries.
It sounds terrifying to live there.
The towers are physically separated, connected only by swaying rope bridges suspended over smashing violent waves. The Greyjoys famously boast that any man who can walk those rope bridges in a howling storm can easily run the oars of a longship.
That environment breeds a rugged, almost fatalistic psychology. It breeds leaders who view the mainland not as neighbors, but as prey. Leaders like Dagon Greyjoy, the last Reaver, who relentlessly harried the western coast during the Targaryen era, taking advantage of a weakened throne.
Or explorers like Alton the Holy Fool, who sailed out seeking mythical lands beyond the Lonely Light and vanished.
Or politicians like Torwyn Greyjoy, who cynically swore a blood oath with the rebel Bittersteel and then immediately betrayed him to the crown. It is a culture of incredibly hard men living in an incredibly hard place, operating on entirely different moral axes.
To contrast the stark, grueling poverty of the Iron Islands, we must examine the exact opposite environment just across the waves. The Westerlands.
The land of gold.
This is a region of rolling hills, fertile plains, and unimaginable, world-altering wealth hidden deep beneath the rock.
The legendary wealth of House Lannister and Casterly Rock. The origin story of this impossibly massive castle reads like a myth of incredible blind luck. The ancient tale goes that a first man named Corlos killed a lion that was preying on his sheep inside a cave.
Right.
When he pursued the lion deeper into the darkness of the cavern, he saw a glint in the stone. He found a massive vein of gold. He began to mine it, and to protect his newfound treasure from raiders, he fortified the entrance of the cave.
Over succeeding centuries, Corlos's descendants, the Casterlys, delve deeper and deeper into the mountain, obsessively following the veins of gold, carving grand halls, treasuries, and tunnels directly into the living rock. Casterly Rock wasn't built upwards like a traditional castle, it was excavated inwards.
Which is mind-blowing to think about.
It eventually transformed into a massive, impregnable fastness that dwarfs every other man-made castle in Westeros. Because of that endless supply of gold, the Casterlys became the richest, most influential lords in Westeros without ever even needing to declare themselves kings initially.
They just bought the power.
It is a perfect, crystalline example of geographic determinism. In a medieval economy, whoever controls the gold supply inherently controls the power dynamics of the entire region.
We've seen the harsh survivalism of the North, the isolated fatalism of the Iron Islands, and the geographically determined wealth of the West. Let's travel south to what the text refers to as the Southern Realms, the Reach, the Stormlands, and Dorne. When Yandel describes the Reach, it sounds like a literal, impossible paradise compared to the grinding reality of the rest of the continent.
Geographically, it is undeniably the most fertile and hospitable region in Westeros. It is defined by endless fields, prosperous farms, placid lakes, winding rivers, and fragrant meadows. And during the ancient era of the Gardener Kings, specifically under the legendary monarch Garth Goldenhand, the Reach experienced what historians call the Golden Reign.
The description of this area is staggering. Yandel writes that it was a time so deeply peaceful and prosperous that entire generations of boys were born, grew to manhood, had children of their own, and died of old age without ever once knowing what it was to grasp a spear and march to war.
Hard to believe in this setting.
In the context of Westerosi history, which is defined by constant brutal conflict, a multi-generational peace is almost unfathomable.
It was an era of unprecedented prosperity and cultural flourishing. But as Yandel astutely notes, bringing us back to the reality of history, all golden ages eventually end. Garth Goldenhand passed away, weaker descendants inherited the Oaken seat, and eventually the Andal invaders arrived, permanently changing the political and cultural landscape of the Reach.
Nested within the Reach is Old Town, the oldest, richest, and most sophisticated city on the continent, and crucially, the home of the Citadel itself. But what truly baffles the maesters is the structure at the very center of the city, the High Tower. Even the most learned scholars do not know who built the original foundation of this massive edifice.
It is a profound, almost frustrating architectural mystery for the academic community. The origins of the fused black stone base of the High Tower are completely lost in the mists of time.
They have no records.
None. Ignorant septons claim the gods themselves came down and laid out its boundaries. Superstitious small folk say the tower simply appeared one day. More radical scholars propose theories that ancient dragon lords from a civilization predating Valyria roosted on Battle Isle and used dragon flame to fuse the stone.
Which is a wild theory.
The very fact that the most educated, text-obsessed men in the world, living literally in the shadow of this tower for thousands of years, cannot definitively say who built it, is a stark testament to how much human history has been permanently lost to time.
Speaking of permanently lost history, we must discuss the Stormlands. This is the tempestuous region south of King's Landing, characterized by primeval, dense forests like the Rainwood and the Kingswood. According to the histories, the first men actually came to Westeros through this specific region first, crossing a natural land bridge from Essos.
They established kingdoms and fought epic wars there, but the profound tragedy of the Stormlands, from a purely historical and archival perspective, is the specific medium the ancients chose to record their deeds.
I found this to be the most heartbreakingly beautiful detail in the entire book. In other parts of Westeros, the first men carved their ancient runes into deep cave walls or massive standing stones. Stone endures.
Right.
But in the heavily forested, timber-rich Stormlands, they naturally carved the intricate tales of their victories, defeats, and lineages into the living trunks of the great trees.
And inevitably, trees rot, wood decays. Thousands of years of detailed human history, of petty kings rising and falling, of epic battles fought in the Rainwood simply rotted away into the damp earth, consumed by moss and time.
It's gone forever.
It is a perfect, sobering lesson for the listener regarding the physical medium of history. The survival of human knowledge is entirely dependent on the physical durability of the medium upon which it is recorded. What survives for historians to study is not necessarily what was culturally most important. It is simply what happened to be written on the hardest surface.
It is a terrifying thought when you draw a parallel to our own modern digital age. Will our cloud servers and hard drives last as long as a carved standing stone? If our power grids fail, our entire recorded history vanishes faster than rotting wood.
A very grim parallel.
Returning to Westeros, let's move to the most culturally and geographically alien region on the continent, Dorne, the southernmost kingdom.
There is a common Westerosi saying that only a Dornish man can ever truly know Dorne. It is deeply inhospitable to outsiders, acting as a natural fortress. It consists of vast, waterless deserts of red and white sand, treacherous and easily defended mountain passes, sweltering lethal heat, and blinding sandstorms.
It sounds punishing.
Culturally, they eat fiery, spiced food, cultivate blood oranges, dates, and figs, and build their ancient castles out of baked mud and straw. To a knight from the Vale or the Riverlands, Dorne feels like an entirely different, hostile continent.
But the text offers a brilliant piece of historical synthesis here from a scholar named Archmeister Brood. He looks past the superficial, obvious differences of sand versus snow and makes a brilliant, non-intuitive connection.
Yes, Archmaester Brood posited that despite the extreme visual contrasts, Dorne actually shares far more sociological and historical DNA with the distant north than it does with any of the fertile central kingdoms located directly between them.
How does he justify that? One region is a freezing, barren wasteland where people freeze to death, and the other is a boiling desert where people die of thirst.
It all comes down to how culture and political history are shaped by extreme, unforgiving environments. Both Dorne and the North are incredibly thinly populated because their harsh lands simply cannot produce the agricultural yield required to support massive, dense populations like the Reach.
That makes sense.
Consequently, both regions cling stubbornly to their ancient insular laws and traditions, distrusting outsiders. And most crucially, from a political standpoint, neither region was ever truly conquered by the Targaryen dragons in the traditional military sense.
Oh, that's a great point.
After the Field of Fire, the king in the north rationally calculated the odds and willingly bent the knee to Aegon to spare his people from incineration. Dorne, utilizing guerrilla warfare and the lethal heat of their deserts, actively and violently resisted the Targaryens for almost 200 years, bleeding the Dragon Lords dry.
They just wouldn't quit.
And they only joined the Seven Kingdoms generations later through a negotiated marriage pact. They serve as the two unconquered, culturally distinct anchors holding the continent together at its extreme poles.
It completely changes how you view the map of Westeros. Now, earlier we mentioned the first men crossing a land bridge from Essos into Dorne. That bridge, known as the Arm of Dorne, was famously broken and shattered into the stepstones. The widely accepted legends, the songs sung in every tavern, claim the children of the forest gathered in a desperate conclave and used incredibly dark magic, a spell called the Hammer of the Waters, to physically smash the continent apart and stop the invasion of the first men.
It is a highly dramatic, very magical explanation that perfectly fits the narrative of a high fantasy world. But what is remarkable is that the Citadel, representing institutional academia, offers a startlingly modern empirical alternative to that myth.
Archmaester Cassander's Song of the Sea theory. When I read this, I was stunned. How does the Citadel explain a shattered continent without relying on magical hammers?
Archmaester Cassander radically argues that it wasn't the synchronized singing of magical green seers that broke the Arm of Dorne in a single cataclysmic day. He posits that the event known in myth as the Song of the Sea was actually a slow, natural rising of the ocean waters that took place over centuries.
Climate change.
Exactly. He attributes this massive geographic shift to a specific climatic event. A series of intensely long, hot summers followed by remarkably short, warm winters. He theorizes this warming period melted massive amounts of ice in the frozen lands beyond the Shivering Sea, which in turn caused global sea levels to rise significantly, eventually drowning the low-lying land bridge and creating the stepstones.
He literally formulates a theory of climate change and glacial melt to explain away a magical apocalypse in a fantasy book. It is an incredibly sophisticated piece of world building. It gives you, the reader, the active choice. Do you choose to believe in the magical hammer of the waters, or do you believe in Archmaester Cassander's glacial melt and rising sea levels?
Yandel presents both theories side by side and leaves the final judgment to the reader.
It is the ultimate expression of the book's core premise, separating observable geographic history from dramatic, convenient myth.
Absolutely.
Having covered the diverse regions of Westeros, I want to take this deep dive off the edge of the standard map. Let's travel to the absolute fringes of the known world, regions completely beyond the Sunset Kingdom. Because as you read Yandel's text, you realize that the Citadel's concrete knowledge gets incredibly thin and speculative the further east and south you go.
Indeed. Once we move past the free cities, which have established trade with Westeros, we are forced to rely heavily on secondhand travelers' tales, translated legends, and esoteric books like Colloquial Votar's Jade Compendium. Let's cast our gaze far to the south first, past the Dornish deserts to the Summer Isles.
Cradled in the Summer Sea, this is an archipelago consisting of over 50 islands. The geography is staggering. The largest island, Jala, is massive, spanning 200 leagues from tip to tip. The text describes towering green mountains, dense steaming jungles, pristine beaches composed of black, green, and white sand, and massive sluggish rivers, teeming with monstrous crocodiles.
It's an incredibly vibrant, terrifyingly exotic biome compared to the gray dampness of Westeros.
And if we change direction and travel far to the east, moving past the Dothraki Sea, we reach the Glasslands. This is where the recorded history begins to feel incredibly bizarre and dreamlike. Before the rise of the Dothraki horse lords, there were ancient, highly advanced kingdoms located here along the winding river Sarn and the shores of the Silver Sea.
The Silver Sea, which, according to ancient cartography, used to be a massive, sprawling inland sea. But due to centuries of diminishing rainfall and climate shifts, it has shrunk and fractured into just 3 Great Lakes.
And who supposedly ruled the shores of this vanished sea, the enigmatic Fisher Queens.
According to the fragmented Eastern legends, the Fisher Queens were incredibly wise and benevolent rulers, deeply favored by the local gods. Powerful kings, warlords, and wise men from across the continent sought them out for their unparalleled counsel. And the most striking detail, they supposedly ruled from a massive, opulent floating palace that made its way endlessly and slowly around the shores of the Silver Sea.
A perpetually floating regal palace. And the lore in this region only gets stranger. The text mentions the existence of the Hairy Men, a savage race of shaggy warriors who reportedly rode to battle mounted on unicorns.
Yandel posits they might be the evolutionary ancestors of the squat, hairy Ibonese people.
And then there's the mention of Liber.
Yes, the lost, ruined city of Liber. The surviving texts claim the city was locked in an endless, horrifyingly bloody religious war between the zealot acolytes of a spider goddess and the followers of a serpent god.
Sounds like a nightmare.
And further east of them, the legends speak of the kingdoms of the centaurs, creatures half man and half horse.
When you apply the historiographical lens we've been using, you can clearly see how early, terrified Westerosi or free city travelers, encountering incredibly skilled nomadic tribes who live their entire lives on horseback, might return home and describe them to scribes as literal biological centaurs.
The sheer terror of the unknown obscures the anthropological reality once again.
Moving away from the heat of the east, let's go to the extreme north, to the freezing waters of the Shivering Sea.
The quest for the Northern Passage is a recurring theme in nautical history. For centuries, incredibly bold or foolish mariners have attempted to sail over the icy talk of the world, hoping to find a navigable way through the White Waste. They operate on the belief that if the world is indeed round, they can find undreamed-of seas and lucrative new trade routes to the east without dealing with the southern tolls.
But the reality is grim. These expeditions usually just freeze to death in the ice, or the survivors come back starving and much chastened by the sheer hostility of the elements. However, Mr. Harriston of White Harbor developed a fascinating theory.
Oh, this is a good one.
He suggested that a warm, hidden summer sea might lie perfectly preserved behind the towering icy cliffs of the far north. It is a beautiful, if terrifyingly isolated thought experiment.
Bordering that lethal frozen sea are the Bones. This is a massive, virtually impassable mountain range stretching 500 leagues from north to south. It acts as the physical dividing line of the eastern continent. The northernmost peaks of this range are known as Krzajazuska by the Dothraki, which translates to the White Mountains.
And the lore detailing what used to live in the White Mountains is astounding. The Jogwin, massive stone giants. And these are the furry, 10-foot-tall giants of Westeros that the Night's Watch encountered. The Eastern texts explicitly state the Jogwin were twice as large as the giants of Westeros.
Which is immense.
They supposedly disappeared 1,000 years ago, hunted to extinction or victims of the climate. But their massive petrified bones still remain, littering the high, freezing passes.
If a traveler somehow manages to survive crossing the Bones or successfully navigates the treacherous Jade Gates by sea, they reach the further east. This is a vast, ancient land of golden plains, terraced hills, and incredibly rich river valleys. And here we find the Golden Empire of Yi.
The scholars of UT confidently claim to be the oldest continuous civilization in the world. Their priests and scribes insist that mankind's very first cities arose on the shores of the Jade Sea, and they entirely dismiss the grandeur of Valyria or Old Geese as the recent boasts of savages and children.
Their cultural mythology is fascinating because they have their own distinct version of the Long Night myth, corroborating that the ancient winter was a global catastrophe. They believe a great warrior arose to fight the encroaching darkness. He is known by many names across different Eastern cultures: Azor Ahai, Yntar, Nefarian, Eldritch Shadow Chaser. But in the specific Yiddish tradition, he is revered as Herkun the hero.
He led the virtuous remnants of humanity into battle, wielding a blazing magical sword called Lightbringer, fighting to bring light and love back to a freezing world.
But the detail I found most compelling is the aftermath of that victory. Even after Herkun won and the Dawn returned, the fabled great empire of the Dawn wasn't magically reborn into a utopia.
Right, it didn't just go back to normal.
The world remained fundamentally broken, populated by flawed humans, full of war, lust, and murder. It is a wonderfully cynical, intensely realistic take on a post-apocalyptic victory. You saved the world, but the world is still deeply flawed.
And finally, sitting at the very bleeding edge of the known world, surrounded by shadow, we have Ashai.
Ashai by the Shadow. It represents the absolute end of the line for academic knowledge. The text makes a point to note that even the greatest, most legendary, well-funded travelers of Westerosi history men like Lomas Longstrider and the famous Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, never actually made it to Ashai.
They just couldn't get there.
The sheer distance, terror, and logistical impossibility stopped them. The few who supposedly did go further into the shadow never returned to tell the tale. It remains a completely closed, terrifying book to the wise men of the Citadel.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's synthesize this incredible journey. We started in the dusty, quiet libraries of the Citadel with a humble foundling named Maester Yandel, attempting to write a definitive book for a king who died before he could ever read the dedication.
We explored the mundane truth behind the furry giants and the misunderstood, fashion-challenged green men of the Dawn Age.
We saw exactly how greedy singers actively rewrite history to secure a warm bed, placing anachronistic knights in eras thousands of years before knighthood even existed.
We examined the brutal, interconnected geopolitics of the ancient world. We saw how the rise of Valyria's dragons and Essos created a refugee crisis that pushed the Andals to conquer Westeros.
We unmasked the Honorable Starks, revealing how they drowned their northern rivals in blood over centuries to unify their freezing realm.
We looked at the sheer environmental determinism of the Ironborn's driftwood crowns and the Casterly's excavated Golden Mountain.
We mourned the tragic loss of the Stormland's history, foolishly carved into rotting tree trunks, and we marveled at Archmaester Cassandra's stunningly modern climate science explanation for the breaking of the Arm of Dorne.
And finally, we traveled to the terrifying edges of the map, past the floating palaces of the Silver Sea, the centaur mists of the grasslands, and the massive petrified bones of the stone giants, all the way to the impenetrable, terrifying darkness of Ashai.
The ultimate value of this deep dive for you, the listener, goes far beyond memorizing fantasy trivia. This text masterfully demonstrates that history, whether fictional or real, is never a static, objective list of indisputable facts.
It is a massive, highly complex, often contradictory puzzle. It is constructed from biased accounts, altered by forgotten climate shifts, permanently lost through fragile recording mediums, and wildly exaggerated by entertainers seeking a coin.
To be truly well-informed, you must look at how the story was recorded, who paid for it to be recorded, and what specific political or social power they had to gain from that particular version of the truth surviving.
It trains you to always question the source.
Now, before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over. We talked about freezing mariners trying to sail north over the top of the world. But the text also mentions that certain wiser men in the Citadel suggest something entirely different.
A different route.
They suggest that if a ship were to sail far enough east on the shivering sea, past Ashai, past the shadow, past the edge of every known, terrifying map, east would eventually become west. A ship would circumnavigate the globe and emerge from the uncharted Sunset Sea on the western coast of Westeros.
It is the standard, logical theory of a spherical world.
But what if the world of ice and fire isn't round in the neat, predictable way we automatically assume based on our own planet? What if that vast, uncharted, terrifying darkness of the Sunset Sea hides entirely new, unimagined continents?
It's a vast unknown.
What if the elder races, the children of the forest and the giants who were pushed to the absolute brink of extinction in Westeros and Essos, never actually died out? What if they just retreated across the Western Ocean to a place men cannot reach?
A chilling idea.
Imagine them, or something far older, sitting in the uncharted dark of the Sunset Sea, quietly watching the Seven Kingdoms bicker endlessly over an uncomfortable iron chair, while something much, much larger waits patiently in the deep.
It's a humbling thought. It serves to remind us that no matter how thoroughly we map our surroundings or how many histories we write, there is always vastly more to the world than we can possibly ever know.
And that endless mystery is exactly why we keep diving deep. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the untold history of Westeros. Stay curious, keep asking the hard questions, and always, always question the source. We will catch you on the next deep dive.